I think a lot of people miss out on a lot of learning opportunities when they're actually trying to learn by doing figure drawing and analytical figure drawing like this. So, I wanted to share a lot of the things that I started thinking about as I draw that I feel have helped me improve a lot over the past year. So, what I usually do is I just start off with what drew me to the reference in the first place. Usually, this is like the gesture or the angles or the pose itself. So when I start drawing, I just use really light lines to try to capture everything I mentioned almost in its entirety as loosely as I can and as lightly as I can because it's not set in stone. You're just starting off the drawing, but I want to make sure I'm starting off again with what I'm interested in. Yes, I do spend time studying the reference beforehand, but also those first few minutes are about, okay, can I get some sort of baseline for where I'm going here that is aligned to what I'm interested in achieving with this drawing in the first place? The whole process after that is really just trying to fill in all the details. And I do that by thinking from the inside out, thinking from the bones to the muscles, and then eventually to the skin, the expressions, if I even get there, to the hair and all of that. Although the hair sometimes is like a nice gestural complement or moment to the overall thing. So sometimes I'll add that in really early on as well. My goal is always to be able to reconstruct things and have takeaways from whatever drawing I do. I'm not always trying to do it so detailed so that I want to be able to draw this exactly as it is from imagination. But I want to be able to feel like, oh, tomorrow, if I want to recall this pose, I can do it to some extent and remember the key points. And that's always how I'm thinking. So, for comparison, I've drawn hundreds of figures, literally hundreds of figures like this within the last year or two. And I learned that I didn't learn that many new things at a certain point, and it really wasn't that challenging after a certain point again. I got really good at copying and identifying shapes, though. So that was it was a worthwhile thing to be able to practice. I think for a lot of people, the goal should be at least to take the things that you learn from tutorials and then try to apply them yourself with your own studies. And it doesn't have to be YouTube tutorials. It can just be a full on course or something you learn from art school if you went to art school. Whatever it is, I'm always trying to do this myself so that I can prove it for myself because I found that you can learn so much, but it doesn't help until you really learn it for yourself. Like, even in math or science, like you can learn a lot in class, but when you go back home and you read it and you write it down yourself and you practice and you solve the problem on your own without anyone else helping you, that's when you're really doing the learning. It's not really the teachers teaching you so much. Those are the skills that are actually going to give you the ability to pass the test and hopefully if you do end up using those skills later on in life to be able to use those skills. So this is also why you're not going to hear me talking about like using negative space too much. That's definitely a really good strategy to be able to draw things and build your observation skills and your shape recognition skills, but I really don't like relying on that because it's not going to help you when you're trying to draw from imagination. It'll be good to set up cool shapes for a composition to actually analyze, oh, this is an interesting shape. I want to reuse this. But when you're using it as a way to be able to build anatomy or build a pose, I don't really like doing that because it feels like a crutch. I want to be able to create interesting things on my own. So I think if you do look at, negative space to kind of help you figure out how to get these angles correct, try to find interesting ones. So in one of these, the girl's upside down and there's a shape between her neck and her arm. That shape is basically a triangle, and I would just kind of like maybe just literally jot down on a note beside it and be like, hey, I want to remember that when I draw somebody with their hands up like this, I can try to look for a triangle shape. And I think that is how you should use these negative spaces and not try to really zoom in and get that negative space perfect so that you can get the drawing perfect. Because then you're missing out on the opportunity to think about how she's supporting herself, how the arms are bending in 3D space, how her forearm is going back into space, and how it's like this sideways triangle and it's not just perfectly facing towards you, all those different nuances. I think you can easily miss out on if you rely too much on negative space. Again, like this is going back to the beginning. This is something that I also recommend. Always think about what's the big statement that you're going to have with this drawing. This is why I really like just telling people like in my reference video, don't draw anything you don't care about. Draw stuff that you like. Draw stuff no matter what it is, no matter what type of study it might be. Pick something that caught your eye for a reason. And if you can't draw it then, write it down. This is because you want to be able to have a goal. So with all of these, there's something I really liked. So for the girl sitting down, she has this it's just a really cool leaning pose. The way she's leaning forward and the kind of shape she's making from her torso all the way up to her shoulders is something I really really wanted to capture. And again, I still feel like I can do this again because I feel like I should have approached it by reducing that to kind of a flower sack shape. And I think that would have been a really, really cool shape to start off with. But I didn't really capitalize on that when I did it. But, and then in the one where she's upside down, she's going to be, it's just really cool kind of C-shaped pose with her legs spread apart and then she's on her toes. So it's got this really stretched, but also very delicate, precise feel to it. And that's going to be part of that little light gestural sketching part in the beginning. That's going to be the thing I want to focus on. That's the goal. That's what I must have at the end of the drawing, regardless of how it turned out. If the face is terrible, if the hands are terrible, whatever, as long as that's the main thing that I established in the beginning, it builds confidence and it makes the drawing, feel like it has a purpose and an easily accomplishable goal. And this goes into something that I'm always asking myself constantly throughout the entire process. I'm asking myself, is this giving me the same feeling as a reference? Is this the same energy? And if it's not, then I just push everything further. I erase it. I bend things. You'll see I did that in the second one. I bent her shoulder and her whole torso to lean forward more because it didn't give me that same feeling. Because your work should be even more impactful than the image. It should show more. Especially with, those things that I'm interested in with animation and just expressive drawing in general. Like it should always push things more and give you even more of what you saw in that reference. And that's what makes it really cool because you might see something completely different from what other people would see. And when you push that, then you show something that's completely new and it's not just a copy of a reference. Even though if it's a study, it can be something really cool that people might think is amazing later on. Another thing I'm always trying to do is identify strategies that I can reuse later. Something that I've heard from Will Weston and the person that I'm actually referring to when I say this is the more often you use a certain technique or use a certain drawing strategy, the easier it is to do. And then you can add more new techniques and go on to more complex things. And so, for example, I'm actually taking his figure drawing course right now. But even if you just look at his Instagram page, the way he draws figures, he's always using these like 2D shapes and converting them to 3D shapes. And the 2D shapes he uses are always based off of anatomy, like very specific anatomical points. And so that's something I'm trying to do now. It's a little bit tough, but I think it's going to be really helpful because I do think in 2D really, really well right now. And so I'm trying to constantly, okay, instead of just drawing the belly like I did before, I want to think about the center line. I want to think about how I can create the whole entire torso as a flat, sheet of paper first and then build it up. And so I'm constantly trying to use little strategies like that across the entire form and redo them with the next one and the next one and the next one. And so currently for me right now, the hardest thing is forcing myself to draw the rib cage every time, but that's something I want to understand. I want to be able to be aware of that. And so I'm doing it every single time so that eventually the goal is that you can reuse it when you see something you don't really understand and the building blocks and how you'd approach it. So you just mindlessly do that. And then you can worry about the details of that specific pose or the hair or the rendering later on much faster without stressing about the construction. If you're wondering what tools I'm using for this, I'm using the 2021 M1 model of the iPad Pro. It has 1 terabyte of storage, but you really don't need that. Again, the layer bump is not that much from the 2020 model or even the 2018 model. The iPads are still really great. Every single one, all the iPad Pros are awesome, especially with the new iPad mini that came out. That seems like they made another mini iPad Pro. So things are getting better if you're interested in iPads for drawing. But I'm also using Procreate as well and my custom brush pack along with a Paperlike screen protector. Paperlike combined with my tapered sketching brush, the brush that I use for almost all my sketches now, and I'm still tweaking the one I'm making for Photoshop. It's not quite the same, but they really make me feel like I'm this fancy traditional animator working with pencil on paper. I'll never really get over how fun it looks when I look at videos online of Glen Keane sketching with this really, I don't remember the brand, with this really dark black thick pencil lead that all these animators use on the paper, and I feel like that when I'm drawing when I use these tools. So it's really really cool. I really recommend getting a textured screen protector like Paperlike, and getting a brush that has a nice taper to it, and then reducing too much opacity, jitter, or whatever. Try to keep the opacity all the way up and just let your pen pressure control the flow. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you are interested in the full version, because this is going to be sped up, I actually have a second YouTube channel called Ergo ASMR, and I have the full version there. There's a ton of noise in the background, but you can hear the pencil marks and everything. If you want to hear me breathing, I'm probably breathing in there too. You can watch that. I'll leave a link in the comments and in the description. You can check out Paperlike in the description as well. And yeah, I won't even be talking in that video. It's just gonna be like 40 minutes or so. And you can draw along. I'll include the references as well. So thank you all so much for watching. Keep drawing and stay positive.